Now, there's more than one way to do pretty much anything when it comes to tracking, and we're just going to take a look at two very simple versions of the tracking editor. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is when our camera is moving, how do we track different things throughout the scene? So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to preview my footage. It's just this very simple kind of panning video of this brick wall with some leaves and trees. So when we think about camera tracking, there's a couple of different things we need to be aware of. First is how clean is our pan, how clean is our motion. We're going to get some slightly different tracks if our footage is a little bit more shaky or if we're walking and recording, which doesn't mean we can't use those for tracking. It just means you might have some slightly different results than what we might get with this one here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to where it says tracker, over here on this side panel, just this little tracker here. And I'm going to hit track camera. This is also where our stabilized motion and warp stabilizer are, as well as our track motion that we'll talk about in a moment. Now, I did talk about the warp stabilizer / stabilization tools inside of Premiere. It works the exact same in After Effects. The buttons are just in a different spot. So we're going to let this analyze my footage to see all the different points that could be tracked through this video. Sometimes it takes a minute, sometimes it takes a little bit different, but what will end up happening is there will be a whole bunch of different little track points across the wall, the floor, the ground, those rocks, the leaves, the windows, all sorts of different points. So we're going to wait, I think about another second or two to see about how long this is going to take for this track camera. Okay, now that my camera has solved, you'll see what I was talking about with all these little points. We got all these little X's. Now, the different colors do represent different things, but what you pretty much need to know is that when we scrub through our footage, we can see that those little spots do not change or shift. Now, to get a better track, the more static they stay, the better the track's going to be. Now, when you notice, if I hover over these points, I kind of get this triangulation happening here. Now, to kind of give you an idea of how your track will look, depending on your track and the location, you may or may not need to switch which points are being triangulated. So you can see how right here I'm nice and flat and look as though if I were to scrub on the keyboard or on my timeline here, nothing would really change or shift. But if I go further up here where I have that slant on my wall, you see I start to get a little bit more slanted, start to get a little bit more straight right here, get a little bit of crooked here. When you're picking your points, that's something you want to keep in mind. So I know right here is a pretty good track. So I'm going to click right here, and you'll see that these 3 points are now highlighted. When I highlight a track point, I can then right click and create a text in camera, solid camera, nulling camera, or shadow catcher. For this exercise, I'm just going to do a solid and camera. And that'll automatically place my solid right here. I'm going to add a couple of these. So I'm going to put maybe right here, create a text. It'll follow this point right here. And if I take this text, come over here to my effects controls, I can then type in some words. Now, if you are like me and you can't see that at all, which is, very fair, I'm going to make sure that my words are highlighted. I can change my font size over here to be quite large, so I'm going to make it 72, maybe I'll type in 200 to make that nice and big so we can see. And I'm also going to change the color from white, which is the default, to a really dark kind of blue color, just so it really pops. I can also change my font type right here. My computer is running a tad bit slow today, so it might glitch a little bit, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to scrub down and do this one called Understand, just because it's big and bold. So I can zoom back out here. Now, if you notice, my word here doesn't really look as though it fits too well with the scene. So I'm just going to rotate it in 3D space, which is based off of that point. Put that on the wall, and then I might have to move it down a bit. Now it is still moving from that one specific point, which is about close to that little top of that W here. And if I hit play now, what should happen is my word sticks to the wall quite well. I can get about, let's say about halfway through my footage, and if I'm like, ooh, this word is still a little off, maybe I need to rotate it up, I can change it in real time. So now, word is nice and attached to my clip here. Now, I also made a solid. I can go inside of this solid as a pre-composition and turn this solid into a video. So I could have a small video or image or shape, etc. right here. But first things first, I'm going to make sure that the scale of my box here is the size I want. And I don't want something super big, I just want something kind of small. So I'm going to scale this a little bit here. And I'm also going to make sure that my perspective is going to look a little bit better. So I might have to shift this in my rotate just a little bit to make it look a little nicer, and maybe turn it a little bit more. Then I'm going to click on this track solid with a right click and click this little button called Pre-Compose. What Pre-Compose does is says, hey, take the footage or multiple pieces of footage that I have selected and put it into its own composition that is then placed and left inside of my main composition, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to name this. Remember, labeling is a super important thing when working inside of After Effects because we can get so many different layers. I'm going to label this Tracked Video 1. If you know what that video is going to be, you can go ahead and label it that. And I am going to call this Jericho because I'm going to be putting a picture or a video of my cat in this spot. So I'm just going to say, okay. Now, you can either move all your attributes to the new comp or leave it in the new comp. I am going to leave it, that way I don't have to worry about retracking my solid. So I'm going to hit OK, which makes this little pre-comp here. You can tell it's been pre-comped because it looks like it's got a little composition button here, and I can double click that and it'll now open my video that is just blue. Now, I have already imported a whole bunch of different videos and images. I have my cat Reese's, she's a video, and I have my cat Jericho here, who's a picture. I'm going to add both to this pre-comp just so we can see the differences. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hide this tracked solid. So I'm just going to hide it with the little eyeball. And then I'm going to click my Jericho picture, which is my cat. And I'm just going to come down here to my transform tools. And I'm just going to scale him down so that he fits in this little area. And then I'm going to rotate him 90 degrees. Let's do negative 90 degrees. There we go. So now I have my cat Jericho here. He is a fancy lad. And I'm just going to hide this Reese's video right here. So if I come back to my main image, you'll see I now have my cat in this video. And if I hit play with my little preview button, it is nice and tracked. Now let's say I wanted to change out Jericho's picture here for my Reese video. I'm just going to turn off the vision of that one, turn on the vision of my Reese's video here. She's nice and cute. She's a very sassy lady, very cuddly. Just going to leave her just like that. Come back to my building. You can see she's now here. and I can hit play. Now let's say I like this, but I don't like the fact that it's a square. We can change the shape of this by clicking on our track pre-comp and adding a mask. Remember we talked about masks in Premiere? We can do all the same things as we can do in Premiere, pretty much in here. The buttons are just in a different place. So I'm going to click this little rectangle button here and come down here to the ellipse tool, or maybe let's do the star tool. That's pretty fun. And I'm just going to click and drag to make a little star mask, which I can then click on my mask, whoop, select V so I can move it, and I'm just going to move it down here. If I need to transform anything inside of my mask, I can open up the mask, I can feather it out or in, which I'm just going to do a little bit. I can make it a little bit less opaque or fully visible. And I can also expand my mask out. So I know I need to expand it just a little bit because I'm kind of missing some of her ears. Well, maybe not so far. Maybe about like that. Just like so. I can also manually come in, double click on my mask, and rotate it as need be. So let's put her in a little pentagram shape just because of how her ears are situated in this picture. Wonderful. So now we can come back to this abandoned red brick, and I now have my cat Reese's in her video, just like that, looking at us all nice and sassy like. So we'll watch that again. There we go. So now we have our video, we had a picture, and text. Now what if we have a video that is static or on a tripod, but something's moving and we want to attach something to that moving object? Let's take a look at that. I'm just going to hide this composition here, and I'm going to make a new comp. So I'm going to take this footage, which I know is going to be my moving footage, create a new comp. Okay, so now I have this footage here. I'm just going to also erase or just hide this tracked video. You can see I still have them both here up in my little project window, but I don't want to see them. So this is my front yard of my apartment building. That's my car. This is a nice little floral hook that I have with this little hanging lantern. I want to track something to swing with this, maybe the word flower or lantern, attached to this as it moves. So there's a couple of things we need to do first. First, if there's any color correction you want to do, this is the time to do it. I, however, am not for this part, but having a clearer color correction will also help your tracking. That way, if there's any kind of weird middle tones that would kind of block that track, you don't have to worry about it so much. I personally know this one works rather well, so I'm not going to worry about it too terribly much. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new null object, just like that. And I want to make sure this null is wherever I want my object to be tracked from. So I want something to be down here underneath my lantern. You could have it to the side, above, over top of your image, but I just want it just a little bit lower, just right there. Next, I'm going to click on my footage here, not my null, but my footage, and I'm going to come back down here to tracker, and remember how we used that little track camera button? There's also track motion. So I'm going to click track motion, and what this is going to do is it's going to open up our footage to the exact point on your footage. So you do want to make sure you are on frame 1. If you are not on frame 1, you'll have not a harder time, but you'll have to do a little bit more work and have to wait for a couple bit more points of data to be made. So I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 1, and I'm just going to take this little button here in the center, make sure it's in the center, and I'm going to grab my whole picker. So you can see I get this little kaleidoscope kind of color. All it is zooming really close into the pixels. And I'm going to place it somewhere, like the corner of this little candle tea light holder and place that X right on the edge. Now we want to put this on somewhere that's got high contrast. So this bright yellow leaf here, this dark spot here, or this little piece here. Right here works pretty well. You can use this outer box to kind of subtract space in here. This is the area of which the track is going to look. I'm just going to minimize this just a little bit and make sure that this is right on that corner. Now, it is going to be checking position. We can turn on rotation or scale. I'm going to leave those off for right now. Then what I'm going to do is hit this little play button right here. What it's going to do is scrub across my footage, and it's going to put a point on every frame, or every couple of frames, across the entire length of the footage of where that exact point with that little plus sign is located in my footage. Again, my computer's running a little slow today. Probably need to give it a nice little nap for a few minutes. I'm going to let this scrub through. Now, if you do start your track halfway through your footage, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure that when you end your track, which it will stop just like it would not continue playing, make sure you go back to that same frame and then hit the reverse play button. So it'll go backwards in time. It's not too much more complicated than that. So we've got our normal play button and our reverse play button. I personally think it works a lot easier. There's less cleanup when I start at the very beginning or the very, very end, but I highly recommend the beginning. And then just let that do its thing. Okay. So let's wait for this little autosave to do its thing. There we go. So now you can see I have all these little track points across my footage. So I'm just going to make sure I go back to the beginning of my comp here, and back to the beginning of my timeline. And now what I'm going to do is click this little edit target here. We want to make our target our null. So I'm going to make sure this is my null 1. If you already have your text or your picture or your video or whatever it is that you're going to be placing as your track, you do want to make sure it's not picking one of those things and it is picking your null. So I'm going to click my null and hit OK. And nothing's really going to happen because we don't have anything in here yet. But after we get our edit target done, we also need to make sure we hit apply. Nothing will happen without having that checked yet. Now, if it asks you what your dimensions that you want, it'll ask you either X and Y, X only, or Y only. For this track, I do want both, so I'm going to click OK. If it doesn't tell you, pick your dimension, you need to try it again. So now, if I look here, I have all these little points, just like that. Now what's happening is if I hit play, my tracker, or my null here, should move with that track. However, we're not really going to see it because there's nothing on the null. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some text. New text. Come back here to the beginning. Click on my empty text layer, which I just made a duplicate, but that's okay. I'm just going to call this flowers. It's going to keep the exact same font, the exact same size, and all that. So I'm just going to take this down by about 100. Got to make sure I have all of my text highlighted for it to count. There we go. I don't know why this S isn't working. Let's take that down there. There we go. There we go. Had a little glitch. I'm going to delete this extra empty layer. And now I have these flowers. I'm going to make sure I move them to where I want them to be, just a little lower than our null. I could put it on the null, and I can put it to the side, which that might look a little nice. Now, I need to parent my flowers to my null. So I'm going to use this little pilly whip, this little curly Q parent whip, and drag that from my flowers to my null. So what should happen, if I've done everything correct, is if I hit space to play, I'm going to let that cache for a second, I should get some nice movement of my text following my null that is tracked to my little candle holder. So you can see, if I scrub through here, my word flowers follows my null, which is following my candle. And that's it. That's how you track motion in your footage in After Effects. See you in the next video.